We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Yes, in Canada it was Thanksgiving. I'm going to blame that.
It was my birthday last week.
It was your birthday last week.
When the podcast came out, I think that was my birthday.
There's that
right?
too.
No, was it Wednesday? No, it was Thursday.
It's an extra celebrational past week. It's all belated, but happy belated birthday, Tom. Happy belated Thanksgiving, Canada. And I'm going to blame that for my somewhat foggy mind this morning. It's just too much turkey the past 2 days. That's what's to blame, I say.
Turkey. Jeez. Yeah, so you mentioned that there was a faux pas with...
Yes.
Faux pas, a problem with India. And then this weekend we went to some friend's house for dinner, and they're Indian, and they were like, yeah, we're all really mad at Canada. I'm like, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Apparently, your prime minister said something he wasn't supposed to say.
Well, I'm not going to get it. We're not a political podcast. It's a whole quagmire. I mean, if the allegations that our prime minister mentioned prove to be true, which there seems to be plenty of evidence that they are true, but nothing has been proven definitively, and nobody has admitted anything. So yeah, that's the whole issue. Whatever. You can look it up if you want to know what the heck is going on between Canada and India right now. I don't want to make anything worse. Not that anybody's listening to us that would care what I have to say.
I mean, we are the political powerhouse at this podcast.
Yes, that's right. But anyway,
shoot, I forgot to grab those headphones. We're going to talk about headphones real quick.
Oh, okay.
And it should be coming out. If you're listening to this podcast, it's coming out tomorrow. If you're watching the podcast the day it came out, it's coming out on Friday. There's going to be a review for what are they called? Sineaptic. So it's Sineaptic doesn't have an E in the middle of it, right? So this is Sineaptic. Sineaptic SE-1 wireless headphones.
I see.
Let me go get them real quick.
Okay. Well, in the meantime,
I know that nobody can see it. Doesn't matter.
That's right. Yeah. There's no video for Tom on YouTube once again this week, so why it's important for them to have.
Everybody can see it. It's just
have them in hand.
Everybody can hear Rob's reaction to.
Tom
you'll be able to see him on the review, right? Yeah. You'll be able to see him on the review.
Tom wants to refer to them
these are
about them.
open back.
Okay.
I want to call them audiophile grade. Can we call them that? I think we can call them that. Audiophile grade headphones. Mm-hmm. And they have dual diaphragm ribbon tweeters or ribbon drivers. We can't call them tweeters because they're full range, just like everything is. So other headphones that have these technology cost thousands of dollars. Okay, so these are much less expensive.
Are these true ribbon, or are they planer magnetic or electrostatic or anything?
It says ribbon. Now, are they true ribbon? I don't know.
Right,
that's what they say.
Okay,
that's what it's a array-based dual diaphragm ribbon speaker.
Gotcha.
Is what they're calling it. So anyways, it's the world's, I don't know, anyways. Doesn't matter. Look at these things, Rob. Just give me a second to put these on.
Tom has taken off his regular headphones so he can't even hear me. Okay. Oh,
just
all right. So
bask in the glow.
If you're
of these headphones,
you're not going to see this on YouTube.
I can't hear what you're saying because I got the headphones.
That's
on.
right.
I got to put the other headphones back on so that you hear what I'm saying.
You can see the images of them in the review. They look very similar to quite a few of the headphones that Monoprice sells. They are very large, they stick out well from your ears. These are definitely not anything stealthy. People are definitely going to notice that you're wearing them. They have this sort of head strap design where it's got the support that goes across your head, and then the actual frame of the headphones is above that. So I would expect
I call them wings.
Yeah,
they're wings.
I would expect these are fairly heavy because usually with that head strap design, they use that to distribute the weight.
They would be if they had any metal in them whatsoever.
Okay,
these are four. I think I weighed them at 418 grams.
Oh, that is lighter than I would have expected. Yes.
You pick them up, you're like, oh, they go way up. So they're not as far as headphones, they're not super light, but when you look at them and when you touch them, you think, oh my God, these are super light. And you put them on your head, it feels like there's nothing there.
Okay.
And on top of that, so there's a lot going on here. First of all, let's just talk about the good. All right, the good of these things sound amazing for
Okay.
$200, $199, not even 99 cents.
So that is not audiophile price tag.
No, not even close, right?
Yeah.
For $199, they didn't even put the 99 cents at the end. $199, these things sound as good as anything I've ever listened to.
Okay.
And we're talking hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars more expensive headphones I've listened to. And these things sound in the order of those, like on the range of those. These are really, really good. Now, are they perfect? No. But are they really, really, really good? And for $200, are they insanely good? Yes, they are. Okay. Yes, they are. So if you're like, I want audiophile sounding headphones and I want to pay as little as humanly possible for them, stop listening to anything else I'm about to say because it might make you think again. And go out and buy these things because they are nuts. They are nuts. The sound quality is nuts for how good they are. Okay. They are open back design. Now, I have listened to many open back design headphones before. None of them have been as open back as these are open back. I mean, these are not like, it allows the air to flow in and out, and therefore the drivers have, it's not all in an enclosed space and blah, 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 and some sound leakage comes out. These are, you put them on, and it sounds like there is nothing between you and the outside world.
All right.
Okay. And in turn, there is nothing between your music and the outside world either.
Yeah. Okay. So they are playing out just as much as they're playing in, and if there's noise outside of you, these are not isolating your ears from the outside noise at all.
Zero noise isolation.
Gotcha.
I mean, it might be 5 dB or 10 dB or something like that, but it is essentially zero.
And given their form factor, these don't appear to be intended for portable usage, so the whole idea that you're going to take them outside is definitely not the intended purpose, I would imagine.
Not only that, they are not adjustable in any way that I can figure out. So you cannot adjust the fit of these things.
Oh, there must be a way to adjust it somewhat. They can't
There is not.
There's got
I cannot figure it out. If there is no adjustment.
Screws? There's sometimes set screws for the headband.
I mean, there's screws on this side right here, but there's no way of moving these. The cups up and down.
I didn't see. So you're not seeing this on YouTube, but the part that actually goes against your head, it's not just a strap. It's like two little spring-loaded cushion pads. Okay, so it's like automatic.
You'll see all this in the review.
Yes,
yeah. So if your head does not fit these, you are screwed, right?
See.
And for me, like, they just barely fit.
Okay.
Like, they're just, like they're on my head, but, like, don't turn your head real fast or they'll fling off.
Interesting. Yeah.
So like I said, $200 for some of the best sounding headphones that you probably have ever heard. Probably. And because of that weird open, like super duper open back design, they don't sound like headphones. They actually sound more like high-end speakers in your room that are real close to you.
Right.
So they have a more airy, if you want to call it that, open. I mean, all like the stupid audiophile
extremely near-field speakers.
Yeah, and that's what they sound like. So it's when you first put it on, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird, right? That's kind of weird how like I don't feel like I'm wearing headphones. I feel like I'm in a room.
Yeah.
Because these things don't block out any noise whatsoever, right? Which, and plus they're wireless, right? So these are wireless.
Wow, that for $200
headphones.
as well. I did not anticipate that.
Like everything that Rob is experiencing right now is what I experienced when I went through this review, right? So you plug them in. The latency is great. I didn't really notice any latency. They don't have like the high-end LDAC, aptX stuff. They just have
Do they have like a
AAC.
separate dongle you need to plug in, or is it just Bluetooth?
It's just Bluetooth.
It's just Bluetooth.
So on their website, sometimes it says 5.3 and sometimes it says 5.2. I think they're 5.2, but it's a little all over the place on that front. But latency is pretty good. Battery life is not great. It's like 13 hours, which I mean, if you feel like 13 hours, but 13 hours is like lowest volume possible, probably, or whatever. Sure. I don't know how long it actually is because I never tested them for that long. But as far as actually using them, they sound really good. But you have all this weird, like, if the room isn't quiet,
Sure.
It's almost like driving in a car.
Right.
Right? There's a noise floor in your room. Therefore, since there's no isolation, you have to actually be like, I had my kids, I had to listen to stuff that everybody else wanted to listen to because they were going to listen to it anyways.
Okay.
So I had Hamilton going, right? Because the family likes, for the most part, Hamilton. And for the most part, I mean, every child except for one likes Hamilton. So, I was like, and I could hear my kid singing in the background. He's like, "Dad, can you turn it up?" Right. You know what I mean? I'm like, so
not comfortably while you're still wearing them.
Yeah. So, but the other thing is, because these are ribbon tweeters and ribbon drivers. I keep calling them tweeters, but ribbon drivers. They're pretty power hungry as far as needing power. So the maximum volume of these things is not all that loud.
Okay.
It can be, depending on the source material you're using, but if you're listening to something that isn't mixed pretty hot,
right,
you're going to run out of volume.
And of course,
very quickly.
Wirelessly, they are powering themselves. It's not as though you can amplify them externally. Is it possible to plug them in with a cord? Okay,
it is. Okay. And I plug them into my external amp that I use, my headphone amp, and it's the same. You end up with, not the same, but you get more headroom, but you end up turning them up like more than my other open back headphones, which, like $1,200 headphones, right? My other open back headphones aren't nearly as power hungry as these things are. So, I mean, with those, I'm usually around minus 25, minus 30 or something like that. And with these, I was like immediately just getting it up to like a kind of comfortable volume level. Where it was comfortable for me, but everybody else in the room was like, can you turn it down?
Yeah. So not particularly sensitive.
Right. So I was quickly going up to minus 15, getting close to reference level on those. I mean, I don't know what reference level is for a headphone amp, but whatever it's supposed to be. So, there's some downsides to these things.
Okay.
You're never going to exercise with them because they're going to fall off your head. You can't really listen to them with people around because they have no sound isolation.
Right.
If you're in a noisy environment, these are not going to. They're not really going to be great. But if you're like, I want to experience and I want to own. And these look like, like you said, these kind of look like high-end headphones. They are plastic through and through. There is very little metal in these things, which makes them light, but it also gives them the feeling like you should be very careful with them.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
definitely not rough and tumble, take them with you headphones. Not at all.
And they sense like a hard case and a soft pouch. I'm like, don't ever use that soft pouch. Just don't. In fact, you should see how they ship these things. It's hilarious. In the review, they come in the hard case.
Yes.
And the hard case is inside of a very large box, which is then zip tied to some like rubber band things that are in the corners that like keep it suspended in the middle of the box.
Nice packaging.
It is nice packaging. It's kind of stupid, but when I got them out and I started playing around with them, I'm like, that might be insurance. That might just be worth it.
They didn't want them broken in transit. That's kind of nice. Yeah, so I mean, it is an interesting, like, who is this targeted for? Because you essentially need a good listening environment, at which point you're like, okay, is this someone who just wants a headphone experience that is similar to or in lieu of a speaker experience, so they have the room that they can listen in, but then is that type of person going to be the one who's looking for quote-unquote budget-priced headphones? It is like, I'm not sure what the target is. I mean, it would make sense to me. Okay, we're going to aim for a nice affordable price for the person who wants so-called audiophile speaker quality. They want the open back headphone sound, but they can't quite afford the upper tier ones. But then it's like, is that person going to have the listening room that is appropriate for this headphone choice? So
I mean, as long as you're not living in an apartment near like a street or a house near a street or something like that at night, and you're everybody is in bed and you put these on, I see no problems with them. But it's kind of hard to on some level recommend a headphone where you're like, well, you can't really listen to them with people around. Yeah. Or
no, I mean, they're basically meant to be in lieu of a pair of speakers for more critical listenings.
I mean, I love them. I think that I like I said, they've got a bunch of in my mind, they have a bunch of downsides, but
sound quality isn't one of them.
That's right. And in my mind, I'm like, hey, if I've got everything else is going on correctly in my life, I'm going to put these on every single time. Like yesterday, my everybody was out of the house and I was cooking. So I was like, I just threw these on with Pandora on my phone, streaming from my phone. And it was great. I mean, they sounded great. Now, I had to be careful because every time I tipped my head back to take a sip of my LaCroix water, they risked falling off.
Right, okay.
But other than that, it's such a strange product. It's like we care about we've got this one driver design that we can use, and we're going to build around this thing, but we're going to keep it literally as cheap as humanly possible.
Right, yeah.
And if you took this, like, I could see them, and I don't know if they're going to do this or not, I could see them taking like every bit of this and just upgrading all the rest of it, and being able to sell it for $1,000 and probably not have it sound that much better. You know what I mean? The other thing is, and I was going to talk,
you've got a hard out, and we're not going to get to anything at this rate. So.
I know. The last thing I'm going to say is, if you're thinking, oh well, that's not a big deal, I'll just put something. I'll just enclose the back somehow, or just put something to muffle that a little bit. You cannot.
Okay.
You cannot.
Ruins the performance.
Like you put your hand up to it, like I'm putting my hand up to your headphone right now.
Yeah.
As soon as your hand gets close and in any way inhibits that airflow in and out of this speaker, you destroy the sound quality. It goes from sounding amazing to sounding like straight garbage on everything from like not even like, oh, the bass kind of, no, vocals don't sound right anymore. People talking doesn't sound right anymore. Like nothing sounds right anymore.
So don't lie down on your side while you're listening to these.
Yes, that is not an option. So I do like them, and I do recommend them. I think that if you're like, I need a, wow, that's not how I wanted that to go. I need a suggestion for my wife or my family to get me something for Christmas that's not too expensive, but something I'm really going to enjoy. This is it. This is a $200 Father's Day gift, birthday present, Christmas present that you're like, I'm not going to use them that much. I don't really want to buy them for myself, but I kind of want to experience them. I think that this is it. So,
all right. So just to repeat, the name is the Sineaptic, Sineaptic SE-1 wireless headphones for $200.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. All right, so what did you watch this week, Rob?
Okay, well, really quickly, because we got no time anymore, I finished up Ahsoka. As people have sort of criticized a bit, I mean, it's very much a daring them to not have a season 2, or, I mean, we know Dave Filoni is going to have a movie that is sort of based around this crew coming out at some point, but there doesn't seem to be, like, any sort of set timeline for any of that to happen. I mean, I guess the strikes and that impacted that as well, since nothing was written. But yeah, basically, if there are people who are like, okay, it didn't have a satisfying ending because there's just like a dozen plot threads just left wide open, and none of that really wraps up. I mean, there's conclusions to some arcs, but stuff that is very much just left open, very much a to be continued or part 1 of it's only 8 episodes, right? So it almost feels like a mid-season ending rather than a full season ending is sort of what it feels like. So I get that. But that all said, I really liked the performances throughout Ahsoka, and I thought the way that the finale was shot and edited was really top notch. It really looked good. It had a different feel to it, a little bit unique in Star Wars live action with the way everything that played out in the finale. So bringing in elements from the animated series is for sure. But yeah, I quite liked it. So just prepare yourself if you haven't watched it yet that you're not going to get a fully satisfying ending to any of this. And it is such a shame that Ray Stevenson passed away, because not getting to see more of his character.
He passed away?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he died.
Oh my God. I'm going to have to Google that and find out what happened. What happened?
I don't actually know cause of death that happened to him. I didn't see that part of it, but it is. I don't know if they're going to recast that character, because I mean, it sure seems like we can't just leave where his character was without any mentions of it. I suppose there's ways to write his character away off screen and have someone else take his place, but it wouldn't feel quite right. So I definitely don't want them to artificial intelligence replace him. That's not what I would want to happen in that case, which is might not be possible if and when the SAG-AFTRA strike comes to an end. But I guess they'll recast that character would be the only thing that makes sense. But it's pretty hard to replace him as an actor, so that's very much.
He's got a presence, man, or had, I guess I should say. Yeah, they haven't revealed.
He didn't have a ton of screen time in this season, and yet he made an impact, and we remember him, and we want to see what he was up to, because his is one of the more intriguing storylines going on there. So that was very much a shame. Then saw the first episode of season 2 of Loki, and this, holy smokes, probably my favorite Marvel thing that I've seen in a long time. This is another one where shot differently, edited remarkably, because you might not even notice how good the editing was in this first episode.
Yes.
Which is a great sign, because they are dealing. Look, we're kind of getting used to timey-wimey stuff and multiversal stuff in the Marvel universe. We're familiar that that's going to be going on, but the cinematic shorthand that they use in the editing to keep it clear where each character is in the timeline in this opening, because there is a lot of time jumping that's going on, and more rapid time jumping than we've had. We're kind of used to, okay, these characters are going to the past, or they're going to another multiverse, or whatever it is, but then usually so far they've kind of stayed there for some period of time. This is like they're just jumping around really, really fast all over the place. And to be able to use cinematic shorthand to keep it clear where everybody is and with whom they're conversing, and like whether they're conversing with the past version of this person or the future version of this person or the current time version of this, but like keeping all that straight visually is kind of an achievement that I think they pulled off so well that you don't even really notice it while it's happening, but you think back on it afterwards. It's like, wow, they really did a good technical job, but particularly just on the editing side. But they also used like handheld camera, which hadn't really been used in Loki before, to just give that sense of him being very unstable and not sure what's going on. And I just thought it was brilliantly pulled off. So yeah, really, really like that first episode. I hope the entire second season continues on that trajectory. And lastly, the one movie that I watched this week was called The Voyeurs. And honestly, the reason that I looked up this movie is because after Ahsoka finished up, I'm like, I would like to see more performances from Natasha Bordizzo. I really liked her as Sabine. I'm like, what else has she been in? And this is like, I think only 2 movies. I mean, she's in The Greatest Showman, but a very small role in that. So this is like the only other thing I could find that was just freely available on streaming to go. So look, The Voyeurs, I have to say, is not a good movie. And yet it almost doesn't matter, because I can't say it's a good movie, but it's like kind of entertaining throughout. Now look, as the title sort of implies, there's lots of nudity in this movie, lots of sexual situations in this movie. If that isn't what you want to watch with someone, then avoid this movie for that. If you're with someone that's what you want to watch, or you're on your own, then just be aware there's definitely adult content throughout this movie. But it's all kind of played lightheartedly. And even though I guess it's supposed to be somewhat titillating, and that it's not really, the tone of it isn't really that way, and the characters aren't responding to things that way. They're always kind of having a laugh at everything that's going on, and it's pretty lighthearted. But the reason I say this isn't really a great movie is because it absolutely could not decide what genre it is. It changes like entire genre like 4 times, mostly in the third act, mostly in the final act, where it's just like tonal whiplash of like, oh, is this now a thriller? Nope. It's a horror. Nope. It's a psychological. Nope. It's a like almost like body horror type of, like, it's all over the place in the third act. And it could have ended like 4 different times, but it's like, nope, one more thing. So it needed an editing pass in the writing stage of things to bring it together tonally. I can't say that was great. However, performances in this pretty darn strong. I liked everybody's performance in this. Everybody is very young and good looking, so that doesn't hurt if that's what you're looking for. And there you go. So if what I've said intrigues you, then you could check out The Voyeurs, but don't go in expecting some sort of like grade A plot.
So from the standpoint of the actors, I believe, and I don't know if this is true or not, this is a completely ignorant statement on my part. I believe that a lot of times they film a movie not really knowing what they're going to do as far as like what kind of tone they're going to set throughout the entire thing. And so they film a bunch of different scenes that are like, okay, we're going to kind of do it this way and do this one this way and do this one this way. And then we'll kind of, stitch it together to make it make sense in the editing room. And they get to the editing room and they go, uh-oh.
I mean, it's mostly...
And that's when I think you end up with what you just described. Because I've seen that in movies before, too. I'm like...
Yeah.
Like, the New Mutants was that way. I'm like, what the hell happened in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely... In the Voyeurs, it's definitely mostly third act problems. Because, I mean, the first two acts are pretty consistent. It went along just fine. And like I say, I wasn't, like, over the moon about the plot and all that or something like that. But I was like, okay, the performances are fine. And, yeah, everybody's young and good looking and lots of naked people. So, okay, entertaining enough to be watching all that. But, yeah, the third act, I'm like, that did not come together. The third act, in fact, it splintered itself apart. And it's not that it was, like, a nonsensical ending. It's not that. But it just was tonal whiplash all over the place. So, yeah, there we go. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right, I didn't really. I just got to whatever it's called, the stupid show I'm watching. What am I watching?
I don't know.
Star Wars Rebels. Yeah, I got to season 3 where they did that a time jump, and suddenly the little boy is now a teenager, and I hate him even more than I hated him before. But
yes, there you go. There's a little bit of that. Oh, I did want to say one other thing about the Voyeurs. They filmed it in Montreal, and they went ahead and set it in Montreal because they're like, okay, we're just going to show some of the Montreal landmarks, and we're not going to bother trying to say this is a Canadian city playing an American city. We're just set in Montreal, and off we go. So that was nice.
Does anybody really care where things are set anymore?
Should you? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that in this case, I understand why you would, but like as far as trying to pretend one city is a difference, like we're really in LA. Like who cares where you are? Like just set it where you filmed it. What's the big deal?
I was like, I remember X versus Sever was like the only thing that filmed in Vancouver where they're like, yeah, it's in Vancouver. And the places we go to, it's the actual name of the building. We're not going to say it's like the FBI headquarters when it's actually the Vancouver Public Library. So it's just, that's what it is.
It's weird that your library looks like the FBI headquarters, though. All right, let's begin the podcast. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, find our episode show notes, as well as our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the images that we were talking about. That's avrant.com, obviously. Go to facebook.com/avrant podcast, youtube.com/avrant, where you can see our live recording sessions. Rob will also include those pictures there, so you don't have to scroll.
That's right.
Too much trouble for you.
Pretty much the only reason to watch the YouTube version at this point. Plus, it comes out a day earlier. There's that.
It does come out a day earlier. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His other handle, other social media is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. We're going to thank our listeners of the week. These are people that support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to patreon.com/AVRant podcast to become a monthly contributor to our podcast. We have 135 patrons right now. We want to thank each and every one of them.
That is right. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. You can go there to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, a minimum of $1 a month. So a big thanks to our 135 patrons over there. We appreciate your financial support.
If you can't support us financially, we understand. Just support us in some way, and we will mention you here. So, am I going with Karl or J. Karl?
It's J. Karl, because we have a Karl, and then with a K, but this is J. Karl, different person, and he goes by that. He has the first initial there.
All right.
Initial J.
Sound like a rapper. So J. Karl gave me permission to use some of his photos on avgadgets.com, where I am the editor-in-chief, and you can find that Sineaptic review, avgadgets.com.
That's
I don't think we mentioned that before.
Yeah, that's where it is, yeah.
And Gurinder, who sent a movie code for me to check, since it was a U.S. disc imported to Canada. Have I found that? Do I know
he said he was going to send it this weekend, so I don't know if
I looked for it and I didn't see it. Doesn't mean it's not there. You might have to send it again. I want to check it for you, make sure that it works. That's right. So
either he didn't send it or you didn't get it. One way or the other, it hasn't arrived, but he said he was going to. So there we go. Thank you, J. Karl. Thank you, Gurinder.
All right. We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through whatever kerfuffle is going on between India and Canada. And
there's the much more serious outright. I mean, there was a declaration of war by Israel, right, against Hamas. So
that's for those of you keeping track. That's the current terrible thing that's happening.
Yeah. If you're looking back, when were they recording this? This is when it's the week after. I mean, conflicts between parts of Palestine and Israel is not exactly new historically, but in 2023, this is the rockets were fired in and people were taken hostage and retaliation and declarations of war, so that's all going on. Yes.
Yeah. So we got notes of gratitude from Karl, Joe, John, Julian, J. Karl, and Ilango. So thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. Many of J's in there, but yeah, Karl, Joe, John, Julian, J. Karl, and Ilango. Thank you all very much for sending in those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We very much appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news, as we alluded to last week, the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, has voted to ratify their new contract with the AMPTP, which is Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, otherwise known as the enemy.
Seemingly so.
Officially ending the strike that began on May 2nd this year. New contract will be effective through May 1st, 2026, and passed with a 99% of WGA members voting in favor and only 90 no votes against. So it tells you how many people are in it because you can do the math.
Yes.
Major gains and assurances were granted to WGA members under the new contract, including restrictions on the usage of AI, which were a primary source of contention. And for those of you that don't understand that part of it, which you should by now, but just in case it's not totally clear, the concern and the worry was that they would AI generate something and then ask a writer to clean it up.
Yes, indeed.
Kind of like as on a like a daily rate, and then the writer doesn't get any credit because it was initially AI generated.
That's right.
And that was the main concern.
They
here.
don't
Like
get
if I work
credited
on
as
it, it's mine.
Writer,
basically.
they get credited as like a script consultant or something along those lines, and it's a gig instead of an actual career. And so I mean, in that contract, it's like first and foremost, AI cannot be attributed as the writer of anything under this contract. So it's just like that's it.
We'll have to wait for AI to strike for them to start
That's
getting
right.
credit.
Yeah, they'll have to become sentient and strike itself. But
give
we're
it a
not
couple
at that
years.
point yet. And then basically writers can, of their own volition, use AI if they want to as part of their writing process, but they cannot be required to. No attribution of ownership or creation can be given to the AI. And so I mean, pretty much the writers got everything they asked for on that front.
Yeah. A few areas of disagreement weren't fully settled and were essentially treated as a case of kicking the can down the road for a few years, since they dealt with budget, accounting, and residual issues, for which there is no or very little data today. And the two sides agreed it made the most sense to revisit those particular items when the next contract comes around and more data will be available. SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, remains on strike when negotiations are in place, and because the WGA has come to an agreement, they can kind of use some of those concessions.
You would think. I mean,
that's the idea now.
It would seem odd for the AMPTP to fight tooth and nail against SAG-AFTRA to give them a completely different deal from what they ultimately came to with the WGA. I mean, again, lots of contention around AI and the residuals and those types of things that were the same loggerheads that they came to with the WGA. So you would think, but I mean, I guess we can't say, but you would think with SAG-AFTRA.
Well, I mean, even when I'm watching things like the Star Wars Rebels, and they have characters that show up from previous movies, and the actors are dead, and it's not the same voice, and all this other thing. It always kind of takes me out of it, and the idea that Robin Williams is going to start showing up in movies again because they can AI generate them and put them in there and everything else. I just, I can totally see why the actors have a problem with that. And really, from the the main actors, like you think about like the example I just gave, the real problem is that there will be no extras anymore.
That's the whole thing. And I mean, that's that already happened. Like those giant crowds that we see in Lord of the Rings or 300 or whatever like that. Like those giant crowds are all computer animated. It's not like they actually hired that many actors. So
they have one group of actors and they just kind of copy paste them all over the place.
If that, sometimes they're just wholly computer generated. But now getting to the point where it's like where we used to see a background actor and you could see their face. They weren't speaking any lines being a background actor, but you could see their face. They're like, well, like they say, originally the AMPTP was suggesting, well, we won't make that wholly computer generated, but what we will do is just have one person come in for one day, scan their face, and then use their likeness in perpetuity for all background activity
forever.
And pay them only once for one day. Isn't that an amazing deal? We aren't getting rid of you 100%. That's amazing, isn't it? And now they're like, nope, you're not going to do that.
Yeah, and it's basically, all of those people complaining about robots stealing their jobs. This is essentially the actor's version of that.
Yeah.
So they are.
So honestly, the few line items that didn't get settled, like, the WGA didn't get exactly what they were asking for in their original proposal, is stuff that was pretty reasonable. It was like, yeah, it's kind of hard to agree on an exact percentage of this new source of revenue that we don't have any data about yet. Like, we're just gonna keep what's in place for another 3 years, kick that can down the road, and renegotiate that before May 1st of 2026. So honestly, that stuff kind of made sense. I can see why it passed. 99% in favor.
So Sony is rebranding its Bravia Core streaming video service, which I didn't know existed, to Sony Pictures Core, which at least it doesn't have a plus on it, so I approve. And it has made it available via PS4 and PS5 consoles. Bravia Core used to be exclusively available through select Sony Bravia smart TVs, but now you can access Sony Pictures Core from a PlayStation. The service is not an all-you-can-eat library. You purchase or rent individual titles, so think video on demand.
That's right.
So why use it over, say, Apple Movies or Google Play? Is Google Play still a thing?
It certainly is in Canada. It's the only way to redeem most digital codes in Canada is through Google Play. It's the last one standing.
Because Sony Pictures Core uses up to 80 megabits per second. Is that what that? Which Sony has dubbed Pure Stream to deliver considerably higher bit rates than any other online movie service except for Kaleidoscape, but those are downloads, not streams. And they also claim to have the largest catalog of IMAX enhanced titles. But it turns out, at least for now, Pure Stream is not available via the PS4 and PS5, and some initial testing by FlatPanelsHD.com, one would think, indicates that the visual quality difference is indeed noticeable versus using Bravia Core on a Sony Smart TV.
So it's a lower bit rate that's coming through your PS4 and PS5, at least right now. Whether Pure Stream will be added to it, we don't know. But in these early days when it's just been added to the consoles, it's lower bit rate than what you can get through the Bravia Core app built into your Sony Smart TV if you have one that supports it.
So if you subscribe to the highest tier of PlayStation Plus, which is PlayStation Plus Premium in territories where cloud game streaming is available, or PlayStation Plus Deluxe, whatever, in territories where it's not, you automatically get a curated library of 100 Sony Pictures Core titles that you can stream at any time for no additional charge. They all seem to be older movies, and the selection will change from month to month, and it's different depending on your region, but it's a bit of an added bonus for PlayStation Plus Premium subscribers, at least. I'm so sick of subscribing to things.
I know, right?
I'm so over it. Like Microsoft 360, all the Adobe products are now subscriber based only.
All the Microsoft Office stuff.
Well, that's Office 360. Yeah, I'm just like, I just want to buy the program. I know. I just want to own the program, buy it, and then you guys stop supporting it at some point, but I get to still use it until it doesn't work anymore, or I buy a new computer and a new program
they only get to charge you once instead of in perpetuity, and they don't get to increase the price every couple of years or whatever it is.
Yeah, so, I'm just done with it. Like the same thing with the whole video game BS, where it's now everything's a subscription based model.
Yes, and games as a service,
Game Pass, and all that other nonsense. Just no, I'm not buying your stupid games anymore. Not that I was, so they didn't really lose a customer. Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer Elite now have models that offer Dirac Live Bass Management as an optional paid add-on. Speaking of paying extra for things, it is only the 11-channel flagship models, the Onkyo TX RZ70, the Integra DRX 8.4, and the Pioneer Elite VSX LX 805. They love their X's.
And those are all
there.
sister models. There are very small differences between some of them on the back panels and slightly different price points between all of them, but they are all sister models based on the same platform. All of them more expensive than, say, the RZ50 that has been out for several years at this point. The RZ70 came in, and at the time I was like, what does the RZ70 feature-wise really offer over the RZ50? And it wasn't much. It didn't increase the channel count or anything like that, but this is the difference. It has the fully independent subwoofer outputs that the RZ50 doesn't quite have, and that allows them to add Dirac Live Bass Management to the RZ70 and its sister Integra and Pioneer Elite models.
Yeah, so adding the multi-sub optimization costs 500 bones. That's a lot. Right. Although for some reason there's also a single sub version being sold for $350.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense in a multi-sub optimization system. Now, there is the thing I talked about with Dirac Live Bass Management where it also does measure your front, left, and right speakers together as a bass-producing thing. So even with a single subwoofer plus your front, left, and right speakers, that's kind of like a dual subwoofer setup. But the real benefit is when you have, honestly, more than two subwoofers in addition to your front speakers. But, I mean, two subwoofers plus your front speakers, that's kind of like a pseudo 3 subwoofer setup that you have going on there. So it can definitely do its work there, but I don't quite understand the $350 single sub version. Like I say, there's sort of an argument as being a dual sub, but not quite so. If you're going to do it, I guess I would go whole hog and get the $500 version. So Dirac Live room correction comes with those Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer Elite receiver models. It is no extra charge to have Dirac Live room correction, but for specifically the multi-subwoofer bass management that Dirac Live offers, that's the add-on price.
All right. You can purchase it directly through Dirac's online store.
That's right.
Oh, there you go. I shouldn't have taken those glasses off. No, comments from listeners. Kris heard Tyler's question last week about wanting to mount his acoustically transparent silver ticket screen in front of his speakers, but wanting to be lazy and not wanting to construct an entire false wall. As it turns out, Kris had a nearly identical situation. He also uses a silver ticket screen, and he wanted to find a way to mount it in front of his speakers without making any holes in the floor, ceiling, or walls. He ended up using freestanding closet support poles, specifically the Stolman model from IKEA. Although that is discontinued item now, so Tyler would need to find an alternative. But the idea remains the same. The support poles twist to expand vertically and hold in place against your floor and ceiling. That is just like a shower curtain rod, in case those of you
have ever little bit beefier and sturdier than that, but very much the same idea as, or like sometimes your towel rack, towel hanger will be the same idea. Yeah.
So we've got hardware that's meant to hold closet shelves, but Kris found it quite easy to use some basic hardware to connect his screen instead, so hopefully that might be of some help for Tyler. I think that this is overall a great idea.
Okay.
As far as those, like for me personally, like I've got my screen mounted to my wall in front of my whatever, and I want to sometimes. There is going to be a day when I get a really expensive ceiling fan, because the ceiling fan that I have in there right now is cheap, but it is. It is too low, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to take the glass bulb thingy off that covers up the lights, and then shorten the little pull strings in order to shoot my projection screen underneath it,
right?
And then even then the screen is just a touch too low. Like if you're short or if you're reclined all the way, the center speaker almost kind of like barely touches the top of the bottom of the screen. I mean, so I like this as like, well, I'm gonna someday want to move this thing around up or down or whatever. I think this is a great idea.
Okay,
I think it's great.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it doesn't have to be IKEA brand. The idea of freestanding supports for a closet, because I mean, he went with the closet mainly because it had the hardware attachments that he already needed. Because if you do a towel rod or a shower curtain rod, it's not going to have that attached to it. But also, it is beefier, meant to hold some weight. So honestly, it can hold more weight than the screen weighs, but nothing wrong with having a little bit of extra security there. And a non-destructive way to be able to stand your screen, essentially just friction fit, more or less.
I like it. I like it a lot. I'm probably going to either myself or ask Andrew to write it up on AV Gadgets. I don't I want to use your pictures. So if you could just let me do that, that would be great.
Yeah, I can't remember if he gave permission or not. No, I guess he didn't explicitly in his email. Okay,
yes,
Kris,
I need you to send me an email.
Give Tom explicit permission so he doesn't get sued.
By you. But right. I still want the picture. I still want the permission, even if you're not planning on suing me, so that later on your ungrateful children don't sue me. Joe shared a link to a webinar with Anthony Grimani, in which he recaps topics from CEDIA, including a network-based audio, the new RP22 home theater guidelines, and the new approaches to bass that were demoed at CEDIA this year. He also answers a bunch of questions from the webinar's audience, and what was supposed to be a 1-hour session ended up going for over 2 hours, so he must be Canadian like Rob.
Anthony Grimani is not, but not shocking there, although generous of him to give that much extra time, but he wanted to go through all these things. I have not had a chance to watch through this yet. I have no doubts. I listened to Anthony Grimani's appearance on which podcast was it now? Different podcast recently. I can't remember offhand which one it was, but talked about some of these topics. So I had a great appearance there. So he's always a good watch, always a good listen. He was very much involved in the creation of that RP22 guidelines document from CEDIA. Nice, they have a direct link to the RP22 document now, so you don't have to go through where I uploaded it to my OneDrive. We'll have a direct link to it as part of this comment. But yeah, I have no doubts about the webinar being worth a watch, but I didn't have a chance to get through it myself this week, so I can't comment on any specifics there just yet.
All right. I got to scroll back up. Now, all right, questions. Jared. So we've had some discussions about reference volume recently, and this whole topic of reference volume being lower at home than at a movie theater is now being discussed all over the place online. That is not true. It's all over the place you are, but not all over the place.
We are looking for it. You have found it, but yes.
You have found it. It's not that hard. Google still works for now until AI destroys it. But in trying to read up on it on his own, he's run into too much BS to sift through without already knowing all the answers himself. So, other than ourselves, is there a good, reliable resource he could read? In its simplest form, is he correct that movie reference volume is 85 dB with 105 dB peaks? And now that the home reference volume should be closer to 78 dB with 98 dB peaks. If he's, who should he listen to other than us? He should just listen to us, really, honestly.
So, I mean, the thing is, we have had, I think, like 3 different prior sessions at least where we did talk about this a bit. I've got links to our previous discussions of this on AVRant, at least the YouTube versions that'll take you right to it with the timestamp in there, where we talked about loudness and reference volume, and then this whole idea of LUFS or loudness units, K-weighted reference to full scale. So I'll have links back to those, but then also the links to the documents that were shared with us that are all written by the ITU, the EBU, and the ATSC. So that is pretty technical stuff that you can definitely read through yourself. I mean, if you don't want to take our word for it, they go into all the technical language about it there. But what it really comes back to now is, I mean, this is actually old information that just, for whatever reason, we weren't talking about for a long time there. You are absolutely correct in, I mean, they reference it all to the size of your room as to what your target reference volume will be. So in rooms greater than 20,000 cubic feet, so full-sized movie theaters, that is where they still have this figure of the true peak is going to be 105 decibels. The actual loudest thing that any single speaker channel might play will be 105 decibels. There's a plus 10 to that, up to 115 for the dedicated low-frequency effects channels, but for any of the full-range speaker channels, it's 105 dB peaks. And then reference volume is averaging everything to 85 decibels minus 20 from the true peak at 105, 85 decibels. So that's for rooms greater than 20,000 cubic feet, full-size movie theaters. And so then at a sort of addendum to that, under the ITU, they actually have a broadcast standard for this with the number 1770. That's where the de facto smaller dubbing stages that we would use for the home mix are going to be 6 decibels quieter than that. So the minus 20 from the true peak is going to be at 79, and then we're going to be at 99 for the true peak there. So that's where those figures are coming from, the minus 6 decibel figure for the home release. Although, specifically that's still going to be for medium to large sized rooms. For very small rooms, they actually have figures in there that are, minus 9. So even quieter than that if you're in a very small space listening to this. But that is written up. It's also then been adopted into the RP22 CEDIA guidelines that we just mentioned have been discussed. In there, the focus for most people really should be like, if you want the out and out, that's what they've now termed as level 3. Level 3 is equaling the cinema experience. So no surprise there. They've got the same 105 decibel true peak going on there. They suggest that, if you want to have a recommendation to give yourself perhaps even a bit of additional headroom in the capabilities of your speakers and amplifiers so that you can apply some EQ, tame some peaks, and still end up with, across the range, it coming out at 105, but that you have the ability to have a little bit of headroom in there. But then they have their level 4, which is supposed to be like, the maximum that you can even get to, which I'm not sure why you would actually want to go even louder, because at that point you're starting to risk hearing damage, right? If the movie on average over a greater than 2-hour runtime, we're averaging greater than 85 decibels, OSHA is going to come in and say, we don't recommend that in a work environment. It's probably not.
You're sitting there watching the movie and OSHA agents bust into your house. They're I'm sorry, this movie's too loud.
I don't quite mean, when I say come in, I mean their guidelines are coming into effect where it's not recommended to expose yourself to an average of 85 dB or greater for more than 2 hours. And definitely we have plenty of movies.
Many movies are longer than 2 hours these days.
That's right. So I'm not quite sure I agree with, level 4 going even louder than that is like what you want to achieve. No. I think you start running it. No, we should probably stop at the 85 dB average, and then in even smaller rooms, less than that, going right down to, at level 1, they're targeting 99, just like that same figure that we talked about in the medium to large sized home setting. So that's fairly settled now. And I mean, like I say, this isn't actually new. This is, 12, 13 years old that some of these guidelines have been around. We're just sort of, for whatever reason, becoming more aware of it at this point. But yeah, if you want to read through all the technical things, I do have the links to the PDF documents from the standards bodies that have written that out. So don't just have to take our word for it.
So I'm trying to look it up while you're talking, but one of the things I've always that's been in the back of my mind is like, okay, so if 85, let's just pretend like 85 dB for 2 hours is, you can do it for 2 hours. Anything more than that, you risk damage. Okay, let's just pretend that's what the number is. So you're like, okay, well, I got up to go to the bathroom. Right. Was that enough of a break in the middle of that?
Or there's a quiet scene in the movie that is clearly not anywhere near 85 dB.
What is, how much of a break do you need between that sustained noise?
Right.
You know what I mean? Which I'm going to try to look that up and try to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's really exact figures in science on that, because it's sort of more of a cumulative effect type of thing, right?
So OSHA's thing is you're going to 8 hours of exposure to whatever noise is fine, and then you would go home.
That's right.
In theory, you would go home after that. So, do you have to have a full night's sleep in between exposures, or is there something? It's like, this you can be exposed to this for 2 minutes. Like, all right, 2 minutes, and then is it 2 on, 2 off, or I mean, like, what's the
right? Yeah.
What's the break time there? I'm gonna ask my wife that. She's an engineer. She'll know. Okay. The main thing he's been trying to calculate is how much wattage he actually needs in his system. He uses ELAC Debut 2.0 speakers sitting 10 to 11 feet away, which is pretty far. The speakers are rated at 87 dB sensitivity. He's used some online calculators, and they spit out that he needs 715 watts. I mean, he probably does for maximum volume, but that's
there's a wrinkle in there that I'm going to address.
Yeah. That seems ridiculous, as he's sure the vast majority of people don't have amplifiers like that. Are you sure? I do. I've just got 715 watts just sitting around. I'm using it right now. So what's the real deal? He does love to listen loud so that he can feel the movie. let's just stop there momentarily and say the feeling of the movie does not come from the speakers. It comes from the subwoofer.
Treble. It's not the mid-range. Yeah, it's going to be your subs taking care of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So feeling the movie and what you're talking about are two separate things. Turning your volume up will help you feel the movie better, but not because of your speakers. So he wants to be able to hit full reference volume, whatever that truly is these days. Also, just so that he can say that he can. Well, you absolutely can. You just might not have speakers afterwards, depending on what speakers you have. I'm not talking about your specific speakers. But go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so the wrinkle in all of this is that any of the online calculators that I've come across anyway are going to be using the mathematically true but not necessarily real-world realistic figure of every time you double your seating distance from the speaker, you lose 6 decibels of output. And that's, in fact, even referenced in that RP22 guideline. Yes. Now, that is true outdoors. That is true in an anechoic chamber and in a very large acoustic space, this greater than 20,000 cubic feet. It will also be predominantly true as well, that every time you double your distance from the speaker, you lose 6 decibels of output versus being, twice as close as where you are now. But realistically speaking, in a normal home theater-sized room, that is not actually the case. It's typically closer to around 4 decibels, sometimes not even that much. Maybe in a large home theater, you'll be getting towards 4.5 or 5 decibels with every doubling of distance. But it's not really 6 decibels of sound attenuation for every doubling of distance. So that makes a fairly significant difference when you recalculate the figures, because if you're saying, well, I didn't actually lose 12 decibels of output in going from 1 meter away, which is like this, you when you're measuring the sensitivity of the speaker, that's always reference to a 1 meter distance from the microphone to the speaker. So I didn't, if I'm going from 1 meter to 2 meters and then from 2 meters to 4 meters, which is actually 4 meters is a greater distance than what you're saying, 10 to 11 feet. 4 meters is about 13 feet. But let's just use that because that's easy math, going from 1 to 2 and then 2 to 4. You didn't lose 12 decibels. I mean, the calculator will say you did. RP22 references that. In an anechoic chamber or outdoors, you would have. But in your real home theater, you've probably lost more like 8, if that. It might be only 6 decibels, in fact, that you actually lost in sound pressure level, moving yourself from 1 meter to 4 meters in a real home theater room that most of us would have in a normal-sized house. So that makes a big, big difference, because if you've actually only gone down, let's say even 9 instead of 12, well, if you went down 9 decibels instead of 12, you've gone from needing 715 watts to hit 105 decibels down to half of that. To go to if you've lost 9 instead of 12, for every 3 decibels of increased output, that's a doubling of the wattage. Right, so now you're at what is that? The 300 and 357.5, whatever. I can't even divide by 2 right now. But, it makes a significant difference realistically in the real world. That's not just some fudging of the numbers. It really is that way. So then you take into account, well, you aren't actually even 12 feet away, right? You're 10 or 11 feet away. That's going to be another reduction in how much sound pressure level was actually lost just due to distance. And you are very quickly going to get yourself into the 200, maybe 300 watt range. You're not going to be in this 700 watt range. That figure also is for just the peak. That's for hitting the 105 decibels that you would get in a full-sized movie theater or a 20,000 cubic foot space if you're following the ITU's recommendations. That means the vast majority of time you're using far less than half of that wattage. It means for a moment transient peak that gets up to 105 decibels, you're going to need somewhere in the 200 to 300 watt range. But the vast majority of time, and again, let's say it's 300 watts to hit 105 decibels. If you're hitting 102 decibels, you're down to 150. If you're hitting 99 decibels, you're down to 75, right? And when we're talking about sustained output, it's going to be well less than 105. So ultimately, if we're saying, A, your room is going to be smaller than 20,000 cubic feet. You probably don't realistically want to be hitting 105 decibel peaks. If we're following how it was mastered for our home, you only need 99 decibel peaks. If the movie was mastered quieter or plays back quieter on your system, okay, maybe you're increasing a little bit beyond that. But the chances that you genuinely need 105 decibel peaks are really reduced. We probably shouldn't really be aiming for that realistically. And then even if you were calculating it, we're not losing 12 decibels. We're probably losing not even 9. In your case, definitely not even 9 because you're not even 12 feet away. So we're down to like 200 watts is almost certainly what you would need maximum peaks, and 100 watts sustained is going to get you like 3 decibels quieter than that continuously. And realistically, that's the sort of wattage you should be aiming for, which, surprise, surprise, is like exactly what your AV receiver can do.
Sorry, I was reading up on OSHA stuff.
I know.
No, I can't find it. So what does that 85 dB number really mean anyways? The peak figure makes sense. That's the loudest thing. But is it the 85 dB number just the average? Like if you set your master volume down to 0, does that mean the average sound is supposed to be 85 dB? That's the way that they are supposed to mix it. Yes, that over, there might be some peaks at 105 or whatever it is, but it's the average noise level across the entire thing. It won't, will hover around 85 dB. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's going to be parts of the movie that are quieter, just dialogue scenes that are 70, 72 dB. If it's a movie that goes down, like it's using silence for effect, or a really, really tense scene where it drops the sound out, you're going to be, down to virtually nothing as far as what's coming out of the speakers for those moments. Then there's going to be some moments that go right up to 105. But it's an overall average across the span of the whole movie is going to be around 85 dB.
So you may ask yourself, why don't they have a lower limit specification here, where
the quietest thing,
the quietest thing, which of course could be 0 in this case. But the reason why they still specify the high limit is because whenever you divide by 0, like if they actually have no sound coming out, the upper limit could be whatever the heck they wanted it to be. It could be as loud as it could be insanely loud. So they have to put that upper limit on there because they don't want there to be any peaks any higher than that. But they don't really care how quiet you make it at that point. So the average should be 85, and the quietest, the loudest can't be any louder than 105. So how do distortion and headroom come into play? Like if your speakers can hit the 105 dB peaks, but they have crazy high distortion when they do so, with having more watts on tap with more headroom help. So it depends on why your speakers are distorting. So if your speakers are distorting because your amp is clipping, and your amp doesn't have enough power, well then getting the bigger amp with more headroom in this case would tamp down the distortion. You would get the clearer sound. But if your speakers are distorting because the woofer is deforming as it's going in and out, then no amount of extra power is going to make that sound any better.
Yeah, it's not going to be any cleaner if you're reaching the physical limits of the speakers themselves. So, this is why if you're designing a system, and quite a bit of that RP22 guidelines is exactly about this, it's saying you got to start with the room. You got to start with the room and the distance that any of the listeners that you're caring about, you got to know those figures first, so that you can choose speakers with appropriate sensitivity and output capability, and then the amplifiers that are necessary to drive those speakers to the output levels that you're trying to reach. It does all have to be a system that works together, but the key variable to begin with is the room and the seating distance. You don't pick a pair of speakers and then say, well, regardless of the room and the seating distance, here's how many amps I'm going to try and blast into them to make them get to that output level. It doesn't really matter if the speakers don't have the sensitivity or the output capability to do that. It all needs to match and make sense. So the thing is, like the ELAC speakers that you have, they aren't the most sensitive speakers in the world. They're fairly, I'm not going to say low, they're average. They're very average in their sensitivity. They're meant for medium-sized rooms, sitting really not greater than 12 feet away. For your 10 to 11 foot distance, they're perfectly reasonable. And like I said, calculating it out, realistically speaking, the most you might need is in the 200 to 300 watt range. That's for a very short-term peak. And the vast majority of time, you're going to need less than 100 watts. You're certainly, to reach 85 dB, going to need well less than 100 watts. You're going to need like 20 at the most.
Right. Yeah. So we've seen the recommendations to have more wattage available for your front 3 speakers, but that's it.
But that it is okay.
But that is okay to have. That it's okay. That it is okay to have less for your surround overheads. But that doesn't seem right. Don't they all need to be able to hit the same reference volume? Distance, my man.
Distance.
The speakers.
Typically.
Yeah, your front 3 speakers are going to be further away than every other speaker. Now, if your surround back speakers are 35 feet behind you,
that's right.
You will need a bigger amp for those. But if they are, like most places, almost arm reach from your seat because people insist on having surround back speakers even when they don't need them, then they need a fraction of a watt to hit reference volume.
Right. Quite often we'll have our surround and our surround back speakers are just barely over a meter away from us.
Right.
There you go. If your front speakers are 12 feet away from you, but your surround back speakers are 4 feet away from you, they are now needing considerably less wattage to hit the same volume output at your seat, given the distance. And saying, the overheads are going to be, 5 feet away from you, something like that. So it's all because of the distance that you typically don't need as much wattage to hit the same sound pressure level at your seat from those other locations. But if you've got a 20-foot high ceiling, then it might turn out that your overhead speakers need to be more sensitive and require more wattage than your front speakers because you're sitting 10 feet away from your front speakers, but then you got a 20-foot high ceiling. It's not, out of the realm of possibility, so it all comes into play.
Yes. Henry used to have a JVC NX5 projector with a 120-inch screen. He decided to convert his dedicated home theater into more of a multi-purpose room since he needs to work from home. So he sold his projection setup and got an 83-inch Sony A90J OLED instead. Now, the OLED looks spectacular. No complaints about its picture quality, but the decrease in screen size has left him missing the immersion and overall experience that he used to have with his 120-inch screen in a totally dedicated theater room.
I mean, that is a significant change in size. That is, 120 down to 83.
One would hope you would have moved your seats closer. But
you would definitely need to, and even if you did, I do appreciate that it isn't literally the same experience just sitting that much closer to a screen that is that much smaller. It doesn't feel exactly the same, even though mathematically the field of view might be the same just from moving physically closer. I get that.
So he's seen my article in Navy Gadgets about why projectors are dying out, and he's heard me say, that his current projector will be his last. But can we envision a situation where it will be reversed, where either of us would go back to a projection setup after having lived with a large flat panel for a while? What do we think he should do? I think you should move your seats closer. As far as answering your question, though, do I see a situation where that would be reversed, where I would go from a flat panel back to a projection screen? And it's very obvious when that would be. When I'm independently wealthy, I have a massive room and and I'm sitting further away than I am right now. As soon as you start sitting farther away from the screen or where the screen's going to be, it becomes even if the cost is no object, it becomes sometimes impossible to get a direct view screen that is of the quality of a projector for even any price.
Even Samsung's The Wall has limits. It isn't genuinely limitless in size that you can go to with that. And then there is the question of speaker placement with something like Samsung's The Wall. You do still have to place speakers around the perimeter. So at some point, you end up with your center speaker either on the ground or against the ceiling, and that is less than optimal. So it is really about size. It's all about size. But given that 98-inch and 100-inch very good full array local dimming LCD TVs are down to $5,000-ish these days. The thing is it completely equal to the 97-inch OLED, which is still costing, $20,000? It's not quite there, but honestly, it's still considerably better black levels, way higher peak brightness than any 100-inch projection setup is going to get you, and you don't have to darken the room to use one of those 98 or 100-inch full array local dimming LCDs. So, now it's got to be significantly larger than 100 inches to me, because if I were to get the 100-inch flat panel, even versus 120-inch projection, I'm like, I put that TV on some sort of stand and get it a foot or two away from the front wall, and maybe I don't even have to move my seats, or I have the TV 1 foot in front of the wall and I move my seats 1 foot closer, and now I'm like, now it's a lot more questionable whether I really feel the difference in the distance. The field of view I can definitely equal. But yeah, I can see down at 83, there's a different feel to it. So, I mean, Tom said, yeah, move your seat closer. I mean, the flip side of that is put the 83-inch on a stand and move the TV closer, because that doesn't feel so weird, right? Like, maybe the way your furniture is set up in your room, sometimes it does make sense. Like, yeah, the seats just feel right being placed in this position in the room rather than moving them, 3 feet closer to the wall, just given where walkways and doors and windows or whatever are. This is the place where it makes sense for the seat to go. But you can move the TV closer to you. You could use
even if it's wall mounted, you can get something that pulls forward.
Articulating wall mount. That's an option there. Or I very much like putting TVs on stands. I think it actually makes more sense to put TVs on stands and have a place to put your gear below them, and suddenly that screen is closer to you without the seats even having to move. Or you can do both. Move the TV closer to you and the seats a little closer to the TV, and suddenly it doesn't feel so different. So to me, it's getting more and more difficult for me to say I would choose a projector over a flat panel given the situation. But if I'm going to go for 135 inches, 150 inches, and I can't afford Samsung's The Wall and don't anticipate that I will, then that's where I'm going projection for sure. And there is also just the thing of, if I do have a fully dedicated theater room, 100% blacked out light control, and I want 135 to 150 inches, or perhaps even larger, then I would opt for projection in that case. But that's a whole bunch of caveats. Most of the times these days, I'm going to be choosing a flat panel. So what do I think you should do? If you're really, really missing the screen size, and like I was mentioning, it doesn't really feel right for you to move the seats considerably from where they are, like, I would consider, I don't know if you can still return or exchange that A90J that you got if you're still within that sort of window, or if you could recoup enough of it selling it, but like, I would consider going to the 98-inch or 100-inch flat panel. The downgrade in picture quality, I'm not going to say it's zero, but it's like remarkably not that bad. And then the increase in size is very, very noticeable going up to that screen size. And honestly, the price that you paid for the 83-inch A90J, I think is probably going to be pretty close to that $5,000 mark that you would pay for one of those TCL or Hisense 98 or 100 inches. And they're darn good. So I think that might be the middle ground solution here. Because it doesn't sound like this is a room where it makes sense to have it fully blacked out when you want to have something on the screen anymore. You want the flat panel experience, but you're not quite satisfied with the 83-inch size. There are alternatives that don't have to break the bank, and I think that's what you should do.
Jason's JVC RS440 is reaching the end of its lamp life. He's had this model since 2018. It has E-shift and can show HDR10, but doesn't have JVC's frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, and isn't a native 4K. Mm-hmm. He has the budget to conceivably upgrade his projector, but should he just get a fresh lamp, or is it time to upgrade? And if so, to which model? Well, if you're going to upgrade, you're going to have to go to another JVC. I hate to break it to you. It's probably what you want to do.
I would think that, I mean, look, the Sony 4K projectors are very, very good. Epson's
5050 UV.
Well, I mean, I was thinking more like LS12000, which definitely costs less than the JVC 4K models. Now, like Epson's LS12000 actually uses a 1080p panel, but wobbles it. Actually, that thing can wobble it 8 times per frame if you want to, because it can do 4K 120 on that thing. So it can really rapidly wobble that 1080p panel. But it means that your eye is genuinely seeing all 4K resolution on the screen. No pixels are being dropped in that scenario. So there definitely are alternatives. It doesn't have to be a JVC. That said, out of those three, the Epson LS12000, one of Sony's models, or JVCs are still the only ones with the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping built in, which is a kind of killer feature if you're watching a significant amount of HDR. So you're coming from an RS440, you're used to lamps, you're not going to balk at the, the NP5, right?
Yeah.
The NP5 model. So that is probably where I would point you. MSRP on that is, $6,000 or $7,000 now, because they actually had a price increase at one point, right? But it's generally you can find it, $5,500, $6,000 is kind of the going street price. Some places you can find it even a little bit less than that. So I would point you at an NP5. Now the question is, should you, right? Should you, given that you're going to have to buy a lamp at the very least, is it time to upgrade to a 4K frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping JVC projector? I mean, yeah, it basically is $6,000 like. Do you have that? Is that you don't have to go into any debt, put it on your credit card and rack up any interest or anything like you got that money on hand? I can definitely make a case for it because to me, really, it's the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that makes the biggest difference. That's a noticeable upgrade from the model that you have. The 4K resolution, on some things you might notice a little detail. I don't think it's a drastic difference just from the resolution, but the way that it handles HDR is a significant change. So if you're going to do it for that. If you're like, I honestly don't watch that much HDR content, then I think you could probably just get a new lamp. It's a very all or nothing, right? You're kind of all in or you're not. And I think I would put it all down to the HDR performance.
I don't know. I have a hard time. You know me. I
know.
I have a very hard time without you say noticeable upgrade for $6,000.
Right.
I noticeable is not a strong enough adjective for me personally. I know that going from my 1080p, very old Epson projectors had 3 or 4 different bulbs in it now.
That doesn't do HDR whatsoever.
That doesn't do HDR at all, right?
Yeah.
To a OLED is going to be more than just a noticeable upgrade.
Indeed.
and I feel very confident, that I would think that $5,000 or $6,000 to spend on something like that. I plan on spending less, but $5,000 or $6,000 on that would be a worthwhile expenditure of money. But I am not this person. I am not capable of saying for them how much $6,000 is to Jason.
I know. yeah.
All we can do is describe to you.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a slam dunk where I'm like, oh, you would super regret not upgrading, because I mean, you got a really nice projector with excellent black levels and really good contrast, and it's compatible with HDR. It just doesn't do the frame by frame thing. So yeah, it's not like you're suffering there if you choose to be like, you know what, I could put that $5,500 to better use on something else, and I'm going to spend under $500 to get a new lamp. I could easily justify going that direction too, but by the same token, I want to say on the flip side, this is not a, oh, don't do it, it's totally worthless situation. I'm like, there's a gap. There's a gap in the performance. It's better. $6,000 is totally going to very much depend on you and your budget, whether it's worth it. But yeah, if you're going to do it, I'd point you at an MP5.
Yeah. Anyways, I think the OSHA thing is daily.
Gotcha.
So 8 hours at 85 dB.
I really sent you down a rabbit hole on
you
that.
Did, is how much you can be exposed to. Everything else has got to be lower than that. So there you go. You can't just leave the room. Christian will be moving to a new state in a few months. His new place has a large detached garage, and since he doesn't need it for cars, he tends to undergo an extensive renovation to turn into a dedicated home theater. Weird. It doesn't need a garage. I guess maybe there's another garage in the house, and he only needs it for that. That's
Could
fine.
be.
His initial idea is to leave the exterior of the garage as is and construct a full home theater enclosure inside of it, room within a room. Since the garage is not attached to the house at all, he doesn't have any concerns about sound escaping the theater, so he had a bit of an unusual idea about the construction they'd like to run by us. His garage is large enough that he constructed an enclosed rectangle within it that would have the dimensions of 24 by 31 by 10 feet high. And since he was not worried about soundproofing, he could just be standing 2x4 framing. But he was thinking it would be only drywall on the outside of that frame. On the inside, for the interior of the theater, he was thinking he would actually leave all of the wall and ceiling base empty, and then he would attach 4-inch thick rigid insulation panels to the front of the studs, giving him 4-inch absorption with a 3.5-inch air gap behind it for the entire surface of the room, except for the floor. Would that work? He's thinking it might be overdamped and sound too dead, so he could add some reflective or diffusive surfaces or drywall at the bottom 2 to 3 feet, and then do this insulation idea the top 7 to 8 feet of the walls. What are our thoughts?
Quite substantial. I wouldn't do this exactly the way that he described it. That's the short answer.
The wall ceiling is empty, and then we attach 4-inch thick rigid insulation mesh at the front of the studs. Why don't you just fill up the base with insulation and then?
Yeah, well, he was thinking you could just gain the air gap space there, but if you're doing we're on that topic now. So if you're doing 4 inches of insulation, 3.5-inch air gap is too large. You wouldn't want that much. You want the air gap to be about a quarter. Yeah. About a quarter of the depth of.
It's only 1 inch? No, 2 inches, right? Shouldn't it be 2 inches?
Let me think here. I'm forgetting what I said before and how I worked all of that out before. Anyway, 3.5 is too much.
Yeah.
That much I know. It's not going to be anything close to 1-to-1. So that's that part of it. But that's very much an aside. My thoughts on this whole idea. I get where he's coming from to some extent. I guess he's trying to do sort of as minimal a renovation in this case. But here's the thing. The garage, I don't know what the HVAC situation is in this detached garage. Most garages, even if they're detached garages, are not climate controlled. The idea is that your car is the thing that's in there, and then the garage door is a very large opening that is not usually completely weather sealed, and basically the inside, usually it's not quite as cold or as hot as outside because there's, some limitation of the heat and the direct sunlight and that type of thing going in there, but it's like, it's not climate controlled. It's not a living interior inside of most garages, even detached garages. Of course, there are garages that have a living space built above them, and that might be climate controlled, but the actual space where you're talking about constructing this new room inside of the existing garage, I would doubt that that's fully climate controlled. So that's why if you're converting a garage into a home theater, the constructing an entire room inside of that existing shell of the garage is usually the recommended way to do it. But a whole part of that is you are installing climate control into that new enclosure that you've built rather than fully retrofitting the existing shell to be a climate controlled zone. You can construct the walls and ceiling and floor inside of that garage shell and make that a climate controlled zone. You would not usually want to do that with only one layer of drywall on the exterior of that constructed room now, this climate controlled room, and you wouldn't want to just have exposed insulation as the interior of that room for a climate controlled zone. There also might actually be some fire safety code things that I'm not fully aware of that you would want to check with your city hall, your local building codes about doing this, because converting a non-climate controlled space, like that could also be a sunroom or a non-climate controlled portion of your basement. These things exist. People want to turn those into living spaces, or an attic, right? They want to convert these spaces into living spaces. There are a lot of building and fire safety and airflow codes that go into that. It's not a trivial thing. So if you were thinking, oh, this is going to be something I'm going to DIY, I'm going to throw up some framing, and I'm going to keep the price down by only drywalling one side, there's a lot more to it.
There is, and I think that for most people, they're going to be like, this is my idea, and then they're going to talk to a contractor, and the contractor says, you can't do that. Yeah. This is what you have to do. Right. So let's just say, for whatever reason, you say, I want to construct this room within a room, the contractor says, well, you got to have at least one layer of drywall. It can be on the inside or the outside, I guess. Okay. I don't know why anybody would want to have it on the outside, but you can do it. Let's just pretend all of that, and they can figure out the HVAC thing and everything else. If it were me, I would just leave the bays open, insulate, put regular insulation in there, and then just put fabric, acoustically transparent fabric across the top of it. And then first of all, your room is now going to be super dead, right? We finally found somebody who's got a dead room that's got too much insulation.
Yeah, like now you're well past 15 to 30% if all of the walls and ceiling are exposed insulation.
And now you get to pay extra instead of for drywall. You get to pay extra for actual diffusers, and you finally have our blessing to do so.
And I wouldn't do diffusers because diffusers still make the treble quieter than it initially was, just not quite as quieter as exposed insulation does. I would just have solid surfaces, about 70% of the room being solid surfaces, at which point it's like, are we even doing this idea anymore? At this point, don't we just drywall? Construction-wise, isn't it just going to be more efficient at this point to finish the interior of the room as you would, and then install insulation in the 15 to 30% range, rather than trying to sidestep it by leaving bays open and then covering 70% of them? I guess you could, but
just do every other bay. Just do every other bay with drywall in front of it. Right. And you wouldn't even have to finish the drywall. See, so in my mind, sure. I understand what he's going for here, which is this thing is going to get torn down if I sell this house.
Right. Okay.
So why finish it? Why have to paint it? Why have to do all that stuff? I can just leave it open and then do this other stuff.
Climate control is the answer to all of those questions. That's why it. Yes. I don't think you can slapdash this.
Well, and I think that if you're trying to get away with not having to paint, not having to finish the drywall and everything else, you could do somewhat of what you're thinking, but then you would end up having to, instead of paying for paint and everything else, you'd still have to wrap the entire room in fabric of some sort.
That's right. Yeah.
So you're still going to end up with
and it would need to be fire-rated fabric because
that's true.
This is a living space. You are turning this into a living space. Even if you're thinking nobody's sleeping or eating in here, I mean, it's still, you're turning this into a living space instead of an outdoor space, which a garage is essentially considered an outdoor space. That's why the door between your garage and your house is an exterior grade door with weather stripping, because the garage is considered the outdoors, even though it's got a cover over it. It's a carport. Just think of it that way. It's not living space. In addition to the climate control concerns, he's saying, okay, I'm not worried about, I can blast this theater, but it's fully detached, it's away from the house, I'm not worried about that. You're still worried about sound getting into the theater.
Just like the headphones I was just talking about.
and disrupting your theater experience. You're talking about an exterior garage. Exterior garages don't have good soundproofing on their exterior walls. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's in a completely secluded acreage area and there's really no sources of noise around him. Okay, fine. But if not, if there's a road near you and you don't want to be bothered every time the garbage collector comes, while you're watching a movie.
And he could live in the middle of a field for all we know. But then, I don't just walk outside at night.
Yeah.
Right? Walk outside at night and you're going to hear, I know, in Mississippi or whatever, when I lived there, the cicadas and the frogs and everything else were super loud. I don't want any of that getting in to my home theater.
Yeah, so all of that leads me to say, my overall thought of this is, I believe if you go forward with the plan, and I like the plan, you've got this space that you're not using for cars. It's a big space. It's a big garage. You can construct a room within a room. All of that. I love that idea. But I strongly suspect when you talk to a contractor, when you talk to City Hall about building code, this is going to end up considerably more expensive and extensive renovation than what you've proposed here. I think you're going to be constructing full walls with an HVAC system that goes in here, and you're going to end up treating acoustically the inside of it like we would a typical theater rather than trying to do any shortcuts that were proposed here. That's my suspicion of how this is going to go.
All right. He doesn't need the entire 31-foot length for the seating plan he has in mind, so he's thinking he'd make the back wall a huge bass trap, at least 2 feet thick and possibly as much as 8 feet thick.
I wouldn't do that. That seems like a waste.
Seems a little overkill, Mr. Anechoic Chamber. Would that be a good idea for the entire back wall? I mean, there's no reason why the world's your oyster in this case. I think what you're going to end up doing is having to construct an actual wall, right? And the fact that you're not worried about sound leakage out or is great. But like Rob said, you still have to worry about sound leakage in. So you're going to end up having an insulated walls all the way around this
walls
thing.
Might be a little thicker than you had initially envisioned. So I don't think it's going to be one layer of drywall anymore.
Yeah. I see it, especially if you're well, I mean, I could make the walls as long as I want. How big of a bass trap do I want in the back? I could just make the entire back a bass trap. I don't necessarily hate that idea. You certainly can think about this room with the idea of where am I going to put, how much insulation do I need or how much bass trapping do I need? Let me make sure I construct the room in such a way so that my couches fit and my walkways are right and everything else. But if you make the entire back of the wall a bass trap, you have to remember the back of the wall is still back there. The back wall is still back there. So if you're putting your subwoofer in front of that, your front subwoofer is it no longer can be on the front wall. It has to be into the room. Let's pretend you went with 8 feet. It's going to be 8 feet into the room now.
Yeah.
So you have to keep those things in mind when you're doing this.
Also, there is definitely diminishing returns on the thickness of a passive bass trap. You might be envisioning, if I could make it that thick, then I can have actual passive bass trapping all the way down into the true subwoofer region, getting down to the 30 or 40 hertz. That ends up only being true if the entire room has walls that thick. When we're talking about bass trapping for the purpose of the crossover region between the subwoofers and the speakers, there's very much diminishing returns beyond a 10 inches of insulation plus about a 2.5 inch air gap. So basically a foot thick panel, which is that's a big old panel, but about a foot thick panel. Beyond that, it's real diminishing returns in any greater depth of frequency that it's being effective in its absorption. So I think even the 2 feet thick, like if you're just honestly, that's the dimensions I want to do, then just build the room that way to begin with. You're probably going to need more room between the existing exterior garage walls and the interior walls than you originally envisioned, because you're going to have your whole HVAC system finding its way in there. You might need the length of the room to be shorter to fit all of the HVAC that goes at one end of the room. So that might solve this issue for you right there. But honestly, do a 2 feet at the most is really all you need. And that's going to be hugely diminishing returns. I wouldn't do 8 feet of insulation.
He would have Reddit bragging rights though.
Sure.
He isn't prepared or asking to get into details about it yet, but just a couple just as a concept for the space, what are general thoughts about installing infinite baffle subwoofers? Since he's building an entire enclosure within the detached garage, the backs of the infinite baffle subs could quite easily be fired into the gap between the original garage exterior and this newly constructed home theater walls and ceilings. So do we think that's worth pursuing? I cannot express to you enough how much I dislike infinite baffle subs. So
I mean, if done 100% correct, then fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's the getting it 100% correct problem.
So you're now, let's just say that you do this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, I'm gonna put infinite baffle subs at the midpoint of the side walls on both sides. Okay, so you have drivers, like, I don't know, 7 drivers from floor to ceiling stacked on top of each other on either side of you, with amps and everything else. And they're infinite baffle, which means, for those of you who don't remember, there's no back. They just are drivers. That's right. In the wall and the back of it, just like the headphones I was doing. They just fire out into the world, but except instead of to the world, usually it's an attic or a room next door or something. That's
well, I mean, the attic makes sense because an attic is vented, so there is air movement into and out of the attic as well as the back of the driver.
So this would be firing out into the garage, which in theory is sort of kind of vented, but not really as much as an attic is. And at the same time, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. Like, who knows what will happen? You know what I mean? There's you're kind of asking for extraneous noises and stuff to
definitely. I mean, you're going to have resonances that set up between the newly constructed wall and the existing exterior garage walls. So from that point of view, I'm not a fan of it. Acoustically speaking, there's the other side of it of, if you do infinite baffle subs, you have no placement flexibility. That's the thing that gets me. You are committed to where those subwoofer drivers have been installed. I mean, look, yeah, of course, with the amount of money and time, you can remove them and place them elsewhere, but you have no possibility for experimentation in placement if you do it that way. I don't love that.
The thing that let's just pretend that one of these crazy, front wall, back wall subwoofer thingies becomes an actual thing that people try to do, right? And you're sitting here with your infinite baffle subs on your side walls going, boy, now what do I do? I can't do the thing, right? I just don't think they're like, I don't think you save any money. First of all, I don't think that that they're going to, for as a whole, like if you take all the people who have ever installed an infinite baffle sub and you tested all their systems and then turned the subs off and just got some regular subs that cost probably less and threw them in the room in the proper placements, I don't think they're going to, as a whole, sound even as good, if not better, as good as just regular old subs that are properly placed and properly sized for a space. I just don't see the benefit of doing this, other than being able to go online and say, I have infinite baffle subs, and having all the the people go, oh, you're so special. You have infinite baffle subs. I don't need infinite baffle subs. I've got subs that are properly placed in my room that are the proper size for my room, and I don't need
and he's already very open to the idea of, the whole back wall, be false wall covering, a whole bunch of insulations. Like you can have in-room subs that
you can't see.
The enclosure, the driver, and the amplifier have actually been designed to work together rather than it being a bunch of DIY recommendations that you pull off a forum, and we don't really know if they were designed to work together. The enclosure is highly variable because there is actually an enclosure on the backside of those drivers if you do it inside of the garage. There's stuff that's not being accounted for. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't think it's needed in this situation because you're already going to have false walls anyway. I would go with in-room subs for you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I know that you probably don't want that, but that's what
I know.
Karl enjoyed hearing our equipment lists for a cost no object fantasy home theaters, but why do we think so small? If cost no object, IMAX offers their private theater options starting at $500,000, and Karl would definitely upgrade from that starter IMAX system with a screen that's at least 2 stories high, has a motorized 4-way masking, and uses a dual laser projection setup that would also meet Dolby Cinema specifications. He'd have film projectors as well, 8mm, 16mm, 35mm, and 70mm, and since he's crazy, he'd sit 8 feet away. So what about us? Would we honestly not go for an IMAX private home theater at home? No.
Okay.
I swear to you, I know you guys think I'm like, no, I would not. If there was an IMAX theater in this house, let's just pretend that there was, right? I would go in there and just go, it's too much. Like, I don't need this. First of all, I've never been in an IMAX theater and come out afterwards and go, wow, I feel great. I usually don't feel good. I usually have a headache. I usually have, a little bit of eye strain. It's just usually, they're not properly set up, Tom, and you would properly set yours up. What difference does it make that the screen is first of all, you're not sitting 8 feet away from the 2-story tall screen. That's ludicrous.
Not, but
all you're going to see is like
Julia
Roberts' mole, and that's all you're going to see the entire time. So, your field of view is your field of view, and all these people who are like, "Oh, I've got a bigger room with bigger speakers that sounds bigger." Okay, Mr. Psychologically affected by the size of your room. I don't need that. I just need to have a field of view that's the proper field of view and speakers that are properly placed and that are hitting reference volume, and I'm happy. And me having to walk 35 feet down a staircase to get into my IMAX theater in order to enjoy it is not something that's going to make me enjoy it anymore. So no, I'm not doing it. I just don't think I would use it as much as you think you would use it.
I mean, I could say, honestly, yeah, if I truly had all the money in the world, then I might have an IMAX theater built on my, mansion compound or whatever like that. Even though, realistically speaking, for me, for my personality, like, even if I had oodles and oodles and oodles of money, I don't really want more than a pretty humble life. So it's pretty doubtful that I would do it. But I won't say it's out of the realm of possibility. Sure, I might have an IMAX theater constructed at my home if I truly had all the money in the world. I think that would probably be in addition to the theaters that I described, because if it's all the money in the world, then I'm still going to have a separate gaming setup and perhaps even a separate, dedicated music listening room and a separate smaller home theater that's going to be a lot more comfortable for a lot of occasions. But mainly the reason, answered was the way that the question was posed to us last time. They were looking for an equipment list of what cost no object, but somewhat still realistically, what do Tom and Rob like? Because he wanted to get a feel for the type of equipment that we think is worth it, basically. That isn't purely bang for a buck, but is still the type of thing that we like to go for. So it had quite a bit to do with what the question was asked, as far as what it is that we answered for that. But yeah, I can say, okay, maybe I would have an IMAX theater in addition to everything else if I had all the money in the world. So, Tom has stepped away just for a little bit, so I will go on to Park. Oh, you know what? It's just time for Parker's question. Tom is just back, so I'll let you go ahead.
All right, I just want to say one more thing about that other thing. I know you're like, oh, well, it's going to be a big screen, and I have all the things, and blah, blah, blah. You're going to have to wait like 35 minutes to watch anything. You know what I mean? At least. You're going to have a team of people whose job it is to get the
money
film
in the world,
loaded.
they can do
It
all
doesn't
the
make any
upkeep for
difference.
you.
You're not going to be like sitting at dinner going, "Oh, in an hour and a half, I want to watch the new."
Right, yeah. You would need a projectionist. Yeah, you need a projectionist on hand.
All this other, and let me call my guy, who, even if he lives up there like he's some robot or something like that, it still takes time to load all that stuff up. And I just want to go up there and press the button on the remote, okay? Let's say. Parker has an Anthem AVM 70 8K, I don't know what, AVM 70 8K Pre-Pro, whatever this thing is. For the most part, he really likes it. But he has always had HDMI handshake issues with it, particularly with his Apple TV 4K and his Kaleidoscape player. Well, this guy lives in a different world than me. In his theater, his display is a JVC NZ7 projector. He also has a Wirestorm HDMI matrix switch connected to the system that connects his Apple TV Kaleidoscape player and DirecTV box to his projector and a couple of other TVs. From his email, it wasn't totally clear whether the sources are plugged directly into the matrix switch or if some or all of them are plugged into the Anthem Pre-Pro. Regardless, his Anthem will play Atmos from his Apple TV 4K unless he unplugs the HDMI cable and plugs it back in and sets up the Apple TV again. And with his Kaleidoscape, the sound will drop out every 6 to 8 seconds over and over unless he unplugs and replugs it in. He's reached out to Anthem customer support, and they responded that it's typically an EDID issue, and to make sure that the output settings for his sources matches perfectly with the display mode of his projector, but doing so has not solved his problems. Anthem further suggested that he might need to connect a different HDMI switch or an HDMI bailin that will cache his projector's EDID signal so that the sources always receive the same information when doing their handshake. They also confirmed that their pre-pros and receivers do not have any video processing in them, so they are strictly acting as an HDMI switch and repeater. Parker feels a bit hesitant to use a different HDMI switch or to connect a bailin. He's worried it might degrade his HDMI signal. I mean, any more than it currently is being degraded. I don't know what to like.
Also digital, so either errors or perfect. Nowhere in between.
Right. But what do we think, and do we have any suggestions? I mean, if it's going through this Wirestorm
matrix switch,
that is the number one thing that I would be worried about. And I can see what Rob's going to recommend here, and it's what I would have said too, which is get the thing that we know works rather than this other thing that I've never heard of. Not that
and
makes
given the equipment
work.
that he's able to afford, I don't think this is going to be an unreasonable solution. And what we're talking about is an HD Fury Dr. HDMI. Now, particularly, you're talking about an Apple TV 4K and a Kaleidoscape. Those don't go beyond 4K 60.
Right.
So you don't need the HDMI 2.1 version. The Dr. HDMI 4K, which tops out at 4K 60, goes for $120, and that will solve this issue. Now, in your case, if the situation is actually that you're connecting the Apple TV 4K and the Kaleidoscape to your Wirestorm matrix switch, and then that matrix switch, one of its outputs feeds your Anthem, which then feeds your JVC, and two or three of the other outputs feed other TVs in the house, you would actually want to put the Dr. HDMI directly to the Apple TV 4K and a second one directly to the Kaleidoscape. So I am talking about getting, there's only one input and one output, HDMI input and one HDMI output on the Dr. HDMI devices. But you would want to plug your sources directly into the Dr. HDMI in that instance because you need the source device, the Apple TV 4K or the Kaleidoscape player, to receive the same EDID, that's the extended display information data. You need it to receive the same signal every time it goes to play. So if you put the Dr. HDMI further down the signal chain, on the output of the matrix switch or on the output of the AV receiver, then those sources are still going to see the EDID from the other TVs. That's what's causing this issue. It's that it's saying, okay, I'm getting EDID. Like you're saying, the only display I have turned on right now is the JVC projector. Why doesn't it go through the signal path and detect that that's the display I'm using? Well, the other TVs are in standby. They're not physically disconnected. Right. That signal is still getting through in some instances, and the Apple TV is like, I don't know what to do. I'm going lowest common denominator here. So, it turns out to be the audio signal that's dropping out in your case, but that's the reason for it. So you would actually want to connect the Dr. HDMI directly to the output of your sources in this instance. And like I said, given your associated equipment, I think maybe spending $240 to do this on two sources is not out of the question. You could conceivably get something like HD Fury's Vroom if you just want to be ready for the future. That's a $550 device that's 4 in, 4 out. So you could use that as a matrix switch, but only 2 of the outputs on the Vroom are actually video outputs. It has 2 dedicated audio outputs and 2 dedicated video outputs, so that might not be enough as a replacement matrix switch. So I think the simplest solution is to get a couple of HD Fury Dr. HDMIs, spend about $240 and solve your problem that way. And that should do it. Having those connected directly to those problem sources, that should eliminate this problem.
All right, Nick. Nick asked, should he wait for a PS5 Pro? Sure, I think you should. Definitely. That's it. Done. He's been enjoying his PS4. He still has some games for it that he's never even played. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got that same thing. Too. I think the first Assassin's Creed, I've never gotten through the tutorial part. So it wasn't any big rush to get the PS5, and since they were in such short supply until fairly recently, he's just waited. But now they're easy to buy, and just in time for all the PS5 Slim and PS5 Pro rumors. Should he wait? The PS5 Pro, if it actually comes out, would interest him, since he's under the impression it would do a better job of consistently playing PS5 games in 4K 60 Hz. With HDR, it seems as though you have to make a choice between frame rate, resolution, and HDR with the current PS5, correct?
I mean, I will pause there and say largely no. It seems as though support for 120 Hz is like not many games are even bothering to try and do it. The difference is actually ray tracing. Ray tracing is the thing where they're like, okay, we can do 4K with ray tracing, but only at 30 hertz, or we can do 4K at 60 hertz with limited or no ray tracing. So that's why you're seeing a lot of games that are having a performance mode and a visuals mode. Which one are you prioritizing? But these days, most of the games I'm seeing, like the performance mode isn't targeting 120 hertz, it's targeting 60. And then the visual mode is targeting 30 with ray tracing. And then very often, a lot of the games now on PS5 and Xbox Series X are having one in the middle that they're calling, performance RT, performance ray tracing, where it's like, yeah, we're going to give you the 60 hertz, and we're going to give you some ray tracing, but not all of the ray tracing of the visual fidelity mode, but we're going to make sure we prioritize that 60 hertz, and maybe we will drop the resolution, the rendering resolution. We'll drop that down a little bit in the background, and we'll render it at like 1440p instead of 4K, and that way we're going to be able to keep some of the ray tracing and the 60 hertz. So that tends to be a bit what's going on. So HDR is never a problem. You're never going to lose HDR. That's never going away. And 4K at a rock solid 60 hertz is not really a problem on the current PS5 or the current Xbox Series X. Those really aren't the issue. Going up to 120, which like I say seems to be kind of a rarity, that is definitely one where you have to sacrifice something else to get up to 120 if the game even has that an option. And then if you want the full amount of ray tracing that might go on for all of the wonderful reflections, real-time reflections in anything that's shiny, if you want that, then very often they're dropping the frame rate or the resolution to get you there. But yeah, HDR not a problem, and 4K 60 not really a problem.
All right. The PS5 Pro, if it actually comes...
You didn't do the last part of this thing because I skipped out there. And then you started reading something else. Oh. So this part here. Yeah, he's not in any big rush, although there are several PS5 games he'd be interested in playing this year. So, yeah, what do we think there? So, as far as a PS5 Pro, we really don't know. We really don't know if there actually will be a PS5 Pro. What actually seems pretty clear is that there will not be like an Xbox Series XX. I don't know what the heck they would have called it because
X squared, obviously.
Yeah, last console generation, we had the Xbox One, and then we had the Xbox One X. That was the like 4K upgrade to the Xbox One. But yeah, there doesn't. Microsoft has made it pretty clear they don't intend to have some sort of performance mid-cycle upgrade on the Xbox Series X. We are expecting that there'll be the form factor change to that cylinder model, but keeping the price the same and keeping the performance the same. The PS5 Slim definitely seems like, yeah, that's coming. You know, they're going to shrink the physical size of the thing, but the performance stays the same, and then they're probably just like Xbox is going to do, remove the disk drive from it and have that as like an additional add-on if you want to pay extra for it. So that seems to be pretty set, that both camps are doing the slimmed down version but no performance increase. The PS5 Pro is really questionable. So my honest take on it is this: we know the PS5 Slim is coming. That seems to be a pretty done deal. There are going to be sales around holiday time because that's when the PS5 Slim is supposed to come out, and that means the PS5s, the regular PS5s, are probably going to be $50 off to make them slightly cheaper than the launch of the system, and I think I would just wait for that. I don't really, I mean, this is going to be bad. I'm going to have egg on my face if I turn out to be wrong, but I don't really know that a PS5 Pro is coming. I think they're going to follow along with what Microsoft is doing and just be like, yeah, it's not the same as when Xbox One and PS4 came out and they couldn't handle 4K. And then 4K TVs came along and people were like, how come I can't play 4K TV games off of these systems? And like, well, we actually need a performance boost there. 8K just isn't a thing. We don't need a mid-cycle upgrade to support 8K TVs. I'm sure Sony and Microsoft had plans in place for like, yeah, if we need a mid-cycle upgrade to go to 8K TVs, here's what we might do for a PS5 Pro. But I suspect that isn't going to happen this generation. I think they're both going to do the slim down models, that's for sure. But I think that's going to be it. Egg on my face if I'm wrong, but that's my honest take. I would rate, in your case, for the holidays, at least get $50 off for a really nice bundle. I wouldn't buy it today where you don't have those things. I think you can wait till the holidays, but that's what I would do.
So another wrinkle in all this, his display is an LG C9 OLED and his receiver is a Denon X3600H. He doesn't have any intention of upgrading either of those right now, and he prefers to plug all of his sources into his receiver. So would doing so limit the PS5 capabilities? He mostly just wants rock-solid 4K 60 with HDR.
So your X3600H definitely would. It would completely limit you because that is HDMI 2.0 on the 3600H. Right. That is 18 gigabits per second. So it is not doing 4K 60 with HDR. You're not getting, well, let's see. HDMI 2.0. 4K, you're not getting the VRR. That's what you'd be missing. You're not getting the variable refresh rate going through that one. So there is some limit there. Yeah, you definitely won't be able to do 4K 120. That's completely out of the question. 4K 60 with HDR should pass through, but you probably won't get the VRR working going through that one. So the thing is, your LG C9, it can fully support up to 4K 120. With VRR, if it's Dolby Vision, it's limited to 60 hertz, but if it's HDR10, it can go right up to 4K 120. There actually was a firmware update for the C9 that added that, because initially it went up to 4K 60 on everything, but it can go up to 4K 120 after the firmware update that came out. So if worst comes to worst, you could plug your PS5 directly into your C9 and rely on HDMI eARC to send the audio signal back to your X3600H. But yeah, actually for 4K 60 with HDR, as long as you're not counting on VRR, variable refresh rate, that should even be able to get through your X3600H. There you go. But not 4K 120.
Infinite Gary has heard us mention that with an LG G3 OLED, simply taking out of the box, going into the settings, turning off all the power saving and AI features and putting it into filmmaker mode is pretty much all you need to do, and that the professional calibration isn't something we'd really recommend with that model. Naturally, Gary would not follow that advice for himself, as he always brings in the professional calibrator, and during his most recent calibration, he talked about filmmaker mode with his calibrator and how, in the case of Gary's LG OLED, its filmmaker mode is actually a bit too bright by default, and the ISF Expert Dark Picture mode is closer to being accurate out of the box. That said, Gary's calibrator mentioned that, on other brands, filmmaker mode is indeed often the closest to accurate by default, but that for a professional, they often want to set both a calibrated bright and calibrated dark mode for their clients, and there's only one filmmaker mode, which sometimes has some of the settings grayed out. So as a starting point, they prefer to use ISF modes if they're available. Plus, there's a CalMan Auto Cal to consider these days as well, and sometimes that needs to have its settings stored in a particular picture mode. but that left Gary wondering, is Filmmaker mode inconsistent across different TV brands and models? Was it intended to be an out-of-the-box pre-calibrated setting? And if so, why wouldn't it follow the industry picture standard targets as closely as possible across all brands? I mean, I think it to a certain extent does try to do that. The fact that it's inconsistent just means that they don't all achieve the same uniformity.
The major thing that Filmmaker mode came about to do was to basically just be a no soap opera effect mode. They talk about having accuracy to the colors and those types of things, but it was a little less to do with that. That is sort of left up to the manufacturers how strict they want to be as far as color and black level, white level, peak luminance, those types of things. The Filmmaker mode wasn't super strict about that. It was primarily about the motion interpolation. It was primarily about the frame interpolation and the soap opera effect that they really wanted to get that turned off and to have it at least target D65 for the white point, which a lot of the other modes don't do. They're a lot bluer. But beyond that, it isn't super strict, and it's not as though there's any sort of requirement to like test every unit or even batch test them. So there's still variability just in the manufacturing process. So Filmmaker mode isn't named professionally calibrated mode. It isn't named don't touch this mode. It's Filmmaker mode, and it was largely about the motion processing. That was the primary thing that they wanted to have turned off in that mode. So yeah, there's basically no strict adherence that any manufacturer has to follow, and surprise, surprise, they don't.
Yeah. John in the Midlands of Ireland. I don't know where that is, but I imagine it's someplace in the middle. But it probably isn't, because that's how these things are named.
Yeah, a lot of things the name doesn't actually mean that, but I don't actually know.
Anyways, he says he enjoys listening to us, even though we have funny accents, and we've given him plenty of ideas to try out in his home theater. But talking about specific model numbers can be confusing or tough to follow sometimes because they're often different in North America versus Ireland.
Yes.
We are aware.
Yeah.
Several years back, when you could still put heavy stuff in your luggage without a massive upcharge, he visited the States and bought an Yamaha RX V795 receiver that he took back to Ireland with him. He made sure to also buy a power adapter, and it worked fine for years. He rarely ever uses that receiver these days, but he still has it hooked up and will use it to play CDs once in a while. He discovered that it immediately shuts itself off now when he tries to power it on. It isn't overheating or playing and then cutting out. It just immediately powers off as soon as he tries to turn it on. Any ideas? Any way to fix it? Or is it simply time to buy a new receiver? I mean, believe it or not, the number one thing that we say that it powers itself off can still be happening the second you power it on. There can be a short. There's a short someplace in it. It's going into a protection mode, which is, I gotta shut myself off right away. Can you fix it?
Possibly.
I don't know. How handy are you, number one?
Well, I mean, it's entirely possible that he's had this receiver for ages.
It's just
maybe
dusty.
Hasn't dusted the back in a while, and
or the inside either.
There's a spider web that's made its way across a pair of binding posts, because that's all it takes. Is a bit of spider silk that went between the red and the black binding posts on any of your speaker outputs on the outside of the binding post or inside of the receiver where those contacts are, and that's all it would take to create a short circuit that makes the receiver instantly go into protection mode as soon as you try to turn it on. It just says, there's a short circuit here and I am turning off. I am not risking the short circuit and electricity flowing through there. And it doesn't take much.
Right.
So, I mean, this could be you had one stray strand of speaker wire this whole time, and it's only just now that it managed to make its way across to make contact, and you just never noticed because it was never a problem before. Or like I say, it could be a piece of spider silk or just dust. Enough dust has accumulated outside or inside. I'm certainly guilty of having a dusty back panel on a bunch of stuff, so I'm not going to think it's out of the question for anyone else to also have that. It could be as simple as that. So easiest thing, nice thorough cleaning. I would probably, at this point, if it's been years, maybe remove all the speaker wire, do a fresh strip, have some nice wire, make sure there are no stray strands, or better yet, install some banana plugs or something like that. And I'll bet that's all it is, honestly, because if it was working the whole time and it tries to power on but immediately turns off, it's almost certainly a short circuit across a pair of your binding posts.
Yeah, I would just give it a good thorough cleaning. Just unhook everything, give it a good thorough clean. Take the top off.
It's probably time anyway.
Yeah, take the top off. Compressed air, do the whole thing, and then plug it back in. If it doesn't work, it's broken. Julian says he has been tweaking his immersive audio system in his lounge. He says it's a 7.2.2 configuration, although the image he sent says otherwise, using an Yamaha RX A3070 receiver and front presence speakers. His sources are an Apple TV 4K and an NVIDIA Shield Pro that he recently added so he can get full lossless Atmos and DTS-X from his disc backups via Plex, which is Apple TV 4K cannot do.
That's correct.
There's something that's confusing him a bit. If he plays something from either his Apple TV 4K or his NVIDIA Shield Pro that is definitely in Atmos or DTS-X, that seems to work perfectly fine. This Yamaha's front panel indicates that it is playing in either Atmos or DTS-X, and bringing up the info to see which speakers are active shows all of his speakers lit up and working. But of course, lots of content is still in 5.1 or 7.1 or stereo or whatever, and he doesn't quite get what his ideal setting should be for upmixing. He's tried pressing the surround decode button on his Yamaha remote, and that lets him set the listening mode to auto, DD, Sur, which is exactly what I'm just saying it, but it's Dolby Digital Surround.
Yeah. But
Neural X and a few others. There are also movie and music listening mode buttons, and those cycle through all of Yamaha's own DSP modes. But just listening to them, some of them do seem to make an audible difference. Others don't seem to make much of a difference at all. So which is the right setting to use, and will any of them get his receiver to say Atmos or DTS-X when the original source is just 5.1 or stereo or whatever? Well, it's going to be Dolby Digital Surround or Neural X. Those are the upmixers for the
Yeah, I mean, this is I can't blame any consumers for being slightly confused. I mean, the most marketing we're seeing is Dolby Atmos. We're definitely seeing more marketing for Dolby Atmos than anything else. And then they're saying, oh yeah, if you have a Dolby Atmos soundbar or a Dolby Atmos surround sound system, then you can play all of your stuff through that speaker system. And sometimes they'll even say like in Dolby Atmos, which isn't true. All right. So just to get that clear in your mind, because that's all the purpose of this is, there is Dolby Atmos, which is a codec where it was encoded in that format and then decoded in that format, and it plays what the signal said to play. And then DTS has their version of the same thing called DTS-X. If the signal, the original signal, whatever you're playing from your streaming service or your disc, was not encoded originally in Dolby Atmos or DTS-X, then it will not play in Dolby Atmos or DTS-X. It will instead play in its original format, 5.1 or 7.1 or stereo, unless you apply an up mixer to it. So the up mixer is just decoding that original signal, but instead of playing 5.1 out of only the 5.1 speakers, or 7.1 out of only the 7.1, or in his case, 6.1, because it looks like he has a single surround back rather than a pair of surround backs. So I think that's what's going on there. But it will take that original sound, and then it will say, okay, what other speakers do you have? You have a pair of front height speakers as well, the front presence speakers in your Yamaha, and it is going to do its own processing to take some of the sounds out of the original soundtrack and place them into those elevated speakers instead. Or if you were playing stereo, it'll put some of the sound into your surround speakers and some of the sound into the overhead speakers, whatever it is. And it does all that by looking at the phase of the signals and looking at the timing of the signals, and it's applying an algorithm in there. So Dolby has their version, and they now call that Dolby Surround. That's that DD Sur that you would have seen. They call it Dolby Surround, and DTS has their version that they call Neural X. So if you're playing a 5.1 piece of content or a stereo piece of content or 7.1, you're never going to see Atmos or DTS-X on the front panel of your Yamaha for those signals. You could see DD Sur or Neural X. That's your choice. You can upmix the sound that way. My advice to you would be to press the surround decode button on your remote when you're getting any of those signals and choose auto. In this case, I would choose, like, if your goal is I want all of my speakers to make sound all of the time, I don't want straight decoding, which Yamaha nicely just calls straight.
I know.
So if you're like, I've got a 5.1 source. I don't want to play it in 5.1. You just press straight and it works. And thank you, Yamaha, for making that very simple. And then if you press surround decode and you choose auto, what it will do is if it's a Dolby signal, it'll apply the Dolby surround upmixer to it. If it's a DTS signal, it'll apply the DTS Neural X signal to it, upmixer to it. If it's a stereo PCM signal, it will apply the Dolby surround upmixer to it. By default, that's the one it uses. That tends to be my personal preference anyway for any of those signal choices. So I would just set it to auto. It's kind of set and forget, and I wouldn't worry too much about it beyond that. But of course, if you just want to try them out, by all means do so. And don't expect there to be some massive amount of sound coming from your front present speakers in anything. It's only going to be what the algorithm said, oh, I could put that sound elevated, and maybe I'll do so. It's going to be once in a while and probably not very noticeable.
Right.
Oh, also, one note. If you do, in fact, have a single surround back speaker, like the diagram that you showed us, the upmixers, the Dolby Surround upmixer and the DTS Neural X upmixer, they will never put any sound into a single surround back speaker. They will put sound into a pair of surround back speakers if you have 7.1 as the base layer, but they will not put any sound into a single surround back speaker. So if you're going to your single surround back and going, there's no sound coming out of here with the upmixers, that is the way it works with a single surround back in a 6.1 bed layer.
All right, who do we have left?
Okay, yeah, we are running out of time for your leave time here. So, on the list, we still have Will, J. Karl, not regular Karl, but J. Karl, and Ilango. They are on the list for next week.
All right, we want to thank our listeners in the week. We want to thank our 135 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Thank you.
That is right. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast, the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thank you to our 135 patrons over there for your financial support.
I just want to thank J. Karl for giving me permission to use his photos on AV Gadgets, and Gurinder for sending me eventually, I hope, or I'll find it.
Ostensibly promised.
Movie code to try out for him. I don't know why I have to thank him for that, but I'm going to.
I don't know. I thought it was going to be there, so I put it on the list. J. Karl, Gurinder, thank you for your support.
So got notes of gratitude from Karl, Joe, John, Julian, J. Karl, and Ilango. Thank you for thanking us.
And I'll say the names one more time. Karl, Joe, John, Julian, J. Karl, and Ilango. Thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. They're very much appreciated. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.